Viña. We Are Vineyard.
Everything gets so tied up in needing to be perfectly done, and experience needs to be completely without any flaw. And so I think I lived a lot of my early years just kind of wound up in a lot of just anxiety for getting it right and wanting to make sure that it was done with excellence and perfection. I would tell myself to relax a little bit. And I would also tell myself that what I'm doing is a ministry. It is important, and God sees what I'm doing. I'm not just making a way so that somebody else can do ministry.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I fully grasped that early on. I think looking at it now, I see it much more like it is like the ministry that God has called me to. And people who work behind the scenes and people who put the pieces together so that someone can show up and have an encounter with Jesus, that is a ministry.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Pathak, talks to Christian Weber. Christian is a member of the Vineyard USA national team, serving as our events director. Let's listen in.
Christian, thanks for joining me to be on our podcast. This is fun.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Are you super excited to do this? This is what I've always wanted to do, is be on a podcast.
No, actually.
I didn't think so. That's why I said it. I thought that was my poor attempt at humor. But
I keep trying to get out of it. Really?
I'm aware. I've been a witness. I've seen that. So I totally get it. And I know that you've memorized probably in full form every single interview and podcast to this point. So I need not tell you how it works, but would just love to hear your story and then some of kind of the work you're doing now with Vineyard USA. You are, the veteran of our team, right? Are you like the veteran, or is there anybody that predates you?
No, I think I'm the OG of this team.
There you go. There you go. See, that's exciting.
Been here for a minute.
So you can just tell us how it all goes. I'm excited for that. But let's start from where it should start, which is, where were you born and where'd you grow up?
So I was born in Naples, Italy. My parents, when they were young, both enlisted into the Navy and found themselves stationed there. They had met in boot camp and then moved together to Italy. And so I was born there, and they were still in service and got discharged and moved back stateside when I was probably about, I think I was 3. And we landed in Massachusetts, where my dad's family is from. And so, just trying to figure out life. And they moved to Texas, which is where I am currently and have been pretty much since then.
Your whole life.
Because there were jobs in the 80s in Texas. And so they needed a job.
Well, still now, really. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the places people are moving. And so you're born in Italy. I don't know enough about how the citizenship works. Like, could you be a citizen because you were born there?
Yes, I can actually, because I was born off base.
Wow.
Because my parents happened to be on a leave when my mom went into labor.
Wow.
And so I had some paperwork that was sent to me when I was like 18 that I kind of was like, had to activate one or the other, dual citizenship. I had it for a while and I let it go.
What?
Because, I know, I'm crazy. I think it's because I was like 18 and they're like, fill out all these papers. And
can you still do it? Like, is it too late?
I don't know. I've never looked into that.
Oh, listen, this is so great. It'd be so great.
That would be so interesting
to be like, I'm an Italian citizen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dual citizen with the U.S. I'm an Italian citizen. Mm-hmm. That would be so cool. And quite a place to retire. I mean, it would be a way of like setting yourself up,
Not too shabby.
All your benefits would be intact. It would be the whole It'd be the
That's
whole
right.
thing.
Yeah, I should look into that. In my spare time, I'll look into that
and
too.
all the time you
activating that.
have, just scour the internet for that. So then you're raised in Texas, though.
Yes, I am raised in Texas. So I've been in the same area. I live on the southwest side of Houston, and I've been here since the early 80s or mid 80s. 86 or so, I think, is when they and settled here. So,
and they weren't military anymore by the time you were in Texas. So they just did the little stint, and then they're done. Huh?
Yeah, I think it was kind of their way of, graduating high school and a little bit of escapism situation happening. Like, what am I going to do next? And my dad is from the East Coast. My mom is from the West Coast. She grew up in California. My dad grew up in Massachusetts. So yeah, we don't have deep roots in Texas at all. And no real extended family or so. But my grandparents, my mom's parents, had moved here again for a job. And they said, look, you need to come here if you want to get some jobs and get paid. And so, yeah, they kind of followed my grandparents here. But that was the extent of how we ended up here.
And do you have, how many siblings do you have? What's the sort of makeup of your family?
I have 3 younger sisters. So I'm one of 4 girls. And I'm the oldest by, let's see, my sisters, if they listen to this, are going to kill me because I never remember exactly. They're like 7, 9, and 10 years apart.
Oh, okay.
So I'm quite a bit older than my younger sisters. Yeah.
Wow. So the next closest is 7 years?
Yeah. And
wow.
She would probably argue, so we're only 6.5 years apart,
Right,
to make us a little bit closer. But,
sure.
Yeah.
But that's a significant gap. So by the time, for example, they're, getting into even high school, you're out of the house, doing your life.
Yeah, I think I was getting married. I got married when my youngest sister was 15. So
wow.
So we kind of joke a little bit. My youngest sister doesn't really remember a time when my husband wasn't part of her life. We were like dating,
That's
just
amazing.
so weird.
That's a really interesting, you don't hear that as a story all that commonly, that big of a, but then they're not spread out. So they're all kind of closer.
They're all much closer. Yeah. So they're like 2 years. So like my middle and of my 3, right?
Yeah.
The oldest of the 3.
Right.
And her, they're 2 years apart. And then the next 2 are 17 months apart.
Wow.
So yeah, that happened pretty quick. I think it's because I was quite a surprise. I don't think it was exactly planned that I was born.
They weren't planning on having an Italian baby.
No, I don't think that was in the, I don't think they thought that through.
Yeah. That's, well, yeah, but Italy, it's a place of romance.
Exactly. That's right. Oh, look, Sicily is so gorgeous.
Yeah.
So are you.
Exactly. Seriously, man, that's not far off. Anybody that's been there. Okay, so then growing up, what did your parents, what kind of work did they do?
So my parents, neither one had a college education, and then they went into the military. So when they came back, I think they were kind of just, looking for a job to sustain their family and their life. My dad went into like a technical field. He worked on like air conditioning and heating, HVAC, that sort of stuff, and kind of got on with a shop or mechanic, like an air conditioning heating shop. And my mom started to work for Pennzoil. She was an admin early on and then stayed with them for years until my sister was born. And then at that point, they figured it out that she could be, they worked it out so that she could be a stay-at-home mom. So most of my early childhood, both of my parents worked, and I went to daycare. I have lots of memories of being at various daycare providers and that sort of stuff. So, and then she was a stay-at-home mom, probably from like the mid 80s until I was Yeah, until I graduated high school. I mean,
Until
she
you
was always-
graduate. Huh.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about how did church work? I mean, was church a thing? Was faith? How did that enter into the sort of family rhythm?
Yeah. I don't know a ton about my parents' upbringing and their spiritual upbringing. They were not Christians when I was young. It was not until actually that a coworker of my mom's in her office started talking to my mom about Jesus and about the Lord. And I think if you would talk to, my mom grew up, I think she would have said that they were like Church of the Nazarene. Like she has vague memories of being part of like a choir, but it was kind of a traditional thing that you did. It wasn't, there was no real relationship with Jesus.
Right.
Or intimacy with the Lord. My dad, I've not ever gotten a really good answer about how he grew up and his faith growing up. I think they kind of went to church like Easter, you know, but it wasn't central to their family or anything. And so when my mom had a coworker who just started talking to her about this church that they were going to and talking to her about the Holy Spirit and I think a little bit more of like just intimacy with the Lord. And so she's like, you should come and check our church out. And so they did. I mean, they brought us all to church one day. I think I was like, I want to say it was like 8. We went to church for the first time. And my mom was like, yeah, we're going to do this thing and go to this place. And I just remember people were really nice. And they had like a children's program and we sang some songs and memorized some stuff out of the book, with numbers and people's names. I just had
it was random, right?
I mean, but everyone seemed to know what they were doing,
right?
And kind of bringing me along as I sat in like children's church, and yeah, I think my mom's friend's name was Susan Dansby. She led my mom to the Lord, and at that point, then my parents started going to church regularly. And of course, then we went to church. And I think by the time I committed myself to Jesus, I was like 9.
Wow.
And they did a little, a call, a gospel call. And but anybody who wants to ask Jesus into your heart. And I was like, yeah, I think that's me. I raised my hand and they did this big old celebration thing and made a big deal with a little non-denominational church. And,
that's what I was going to say. So non-denominational church.
Yeah, it was, they wouldn't have said it, but it was an AG church, but I didn't know it at the time.
Right.
And it was, again, I didn't realize this, but it was pretty, there was lots of like banner waving. I mean, I remember I went to like a banner making class on a Sunday afternoon and
I love it.
Mine said like Jehovah Jireh and it was all glittery and puffy paint.
I love it.
And I was so proud of it. But yeah, the tambourines and, the ribbons and stuff. And so
good. Jehovah Jireh.
Normal. Yeah.
It was normal.
It
was just normal. It was like, I guess this is what we do. Yeah. This is the
I
thing.
think this is what you're supposed to do. You pray and you fall down and then somebody else comes and prays for you until you get up again. Like
so good.
That was kind of the thing. So,
and that's all the way through. So from 9 on.
So from 9 until I was, let's see. I was in that kind of church until I was like 7. I was just about 17. Yeah.
Wow.
So we were it was called Living Waters. It was that little church. And then we went to another one that was a little bit closer to our house. We had moved. And it was, again, a non-denominational church, but we had some friends that were going there. And so we started attending this other small church near in the area. And I was there, I think we started there when I was in middle school. So middle school all the way into high school, almost. We were there. And so, yeah, it wasn't until I was 17 that I actually heard or found out about the Vineyard because of a friend. We were on a girlfriend of mine at our church that we were going to. We're on the leadership team for our youth group. We led Bible study and we helped plan events and that sort of stuff. And we were taking a break for the summer. I remember our youth pastor was like, yeah, we're going to not do any sort of like leadership stuff for the summer. We're just going to do some hangouts. And so we can recalibrate for the year. And so we had another friend that had already started going to the vineyard that we had heard about. And I was like, I don't know what this vineyard church is. Like, what even is the vineyard?
Right.
It's like a weird name to me. And because I just thought like all churches should have something like, I don't know, less vague. You know,
Right.
like the vineyard. What does that even mean?
Right.
It's like a wine vineyard or something.
Right.
You know? And so she said, hey, our friend over here has been going to youth at the Sugar Land Vineyard up the road from us. We should go check it out on our break. And I was like, man, I don't know. We're probably going to get in trouble. Like, because we're supposed to be doing this thing over here. She's like, come on. Like, what's it going to do? I was like, yeah, all right, we'll check it out. And so we went on a Sunday night. It was a small little group, probably about 15 kids or so. And, but they just were like having fun and genuinely enjoyed each other. Like it looked like the group genuinely enjoyed hanging out with one another. They had relationships. It didn't feel like stuffy or there was a list of like to-dos or an agenda. Like it was just kind of relational, which our other group was kind of like that too. But there were like all these like rules that you were supposed of who you were supposed to be and how you're supposed to carry yourself. And so when I walked in, I was like, man, this feels a lot more like I can just like be who I am and show up.
And only 15 kids. So it's not like a big rockin', like there's no lasers, there's no fog, there's no like big game. It's just people hanging out. Yeah.
People hanging out in some like random room. At that time, they had just recently moved into that building. And so it was like there was still like construction happening in various places. You know, we just kind of sat in like, I think it was like a kid's room or something, or maybe it was like the main auditorium. I don't really remember, but we just like sat in a group of chairs and just chatted. And it felt very like you just walked into someone's house and hung out, you know?
That's cool. And so then you're like, I think I'm going to start showing up at this.
Yeah. So I was like, well, you know, for our break, like, well, let's just start coming on Sundays. Like, we'll just come Sunday nights and we'll hang out because they weren't kicking us out. Like they didn't tell us we couldn't show up. And they're like, yeah, sure. If you want to be here, we're happy to have you. And so we did. And then and that was kind of it. I mean, I never looked back after that. We had to have, you know, some hard conversations with my youth pastor, you know, from the other church. But
yeah,
I just felt like it was maybe one step towards me being able to be all of who I am. Like I could be, I didn't have to pretend that I was more religious than I actually was in my real life. Or I didn't have to like act like I knew more than I really did. I don't know, you know, it just felt, I mean, it seems like it's kind of cliche. I have listened to all of our podcasts and the cliche thing is like, it just felt like it was home. And that is really my experience. I walked in and felt like these people are a place of home for me. Yeah. So I started attending with my friend regularly. And then my family was like, we should probably like check this church out that our daughter is.
My kid's going. I should probably at least make sure they're not crazy. Right. Totally.
Yeah. And so, and then ultimately they stopped attending that church and started attending the vineyard.
Oh, how interesting. And so then they're like, this is pretty cool. We like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Came over and got plugged in and
it's such and you know, and your story, the one you're describing is one that happens quite a bit, actually. I think about different folks in the life of our church that they came to our church through their like youth, sometimes a friend even. So kind of like, you know, you were with a friend. So a friend brings their friend whose then family comes. That's like a really common way that people end up in churches. I mean, it's really, really common. So it's, again, one of those things where it's like your youth group's pretty important for creating kind of an outward facing connection. Because we've seen even, I mean, I think just our last baptism, we saw a girl baptized, came to Christ. Her family were a little nervous, like, what is this about? And so then they were kind of hanging around, and then they've come to faith. So it's like it came through the kids, which is not generally, well, I guess it depends on the church background. I find most pastors are thinking about youth as a means of managing the kids of the families. That's kind of how they think about youth group. Mm-hmm. But my story, and now even hearing yours, like I came to know Christ because there was like folks thinking about me because I was the friend of a kid, So it is interesting to see how in that little fluid window where kind of random, I mean, even the way you described it, it's like, yeah, let's go over there. It isn't like this super intense thing. It's just,
it's just like, let's check it out.
And then you're in, like, till now. I mean, that's pretty wild to think, like, that random, let's check it out, leads to a career, let alone a whole life in a thing. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's because I felt seen. Like Reagan and Deanna Wagner were the youth pastors at that time. And they just were really welcoming and really intentional about, including people, even like some, because I was kind of like, if you think about like youth, right? Like 17, I was a little bit on the older end even. Like I just turned 17.
You get 1 year, right? Yeah.
You get like 1 year, but that point in my life was a catalyst for lasting relationships that I've got even to this day. I mean, I met my husband there in that youth group, deep relationships that I still have today formed out of that youth group,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah. Okay. So you're in that youth group, but then you're graduating and you've now met Ben. So I imagine you start dating somewhere near there, maybe right away, or does it take a minute?
No, it takes a minute. It takes a minute. But we start dating. I think I was a senior in high school when we started dating.
All right. Yeah. So pretty quick. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we started hanging out, and then we started like hanging out every weekend. We had like a little core group of people where we're just like friends every weekend. And he was persistent. I was
That's a good way of saying that. That's perfect.
I was not super interested at first, but I really enjoyed his company. And so finally I was like, all right, we'll go hang out.
He was persistent. I like that. That's great. That's really great.
So then graduated high school, and Ben became like the facilities person at the vineyard, at the Sugar Land Vineyard. And so by proxy, I would hang out with him while he was cleaning bathrooms and such. And so we would kind of divvy it up, because it meant like then he could go like to the movie, or he could do whatever thing. Right. While we're like resetting the chairs, and, the facilities person at that time who was over Ben. And I can't remember if he was like an intern or actually employed. I mean, I don't remember. I just know that he had jobs to do at the church, right? And so we would get like a little ruler out between each of the chairs to make sure that they're all straight and lined up just perfectly. And so I would help him do that. And so we were pretty involved at the church.
I'd say
every waking moment we were probably hanging out there at the church. We were like, they would host Alpha, and we would come in and like eat all the leftover food because we were so poor. And we would have like just hang out. I mean, we'd just hang out there at the building. I mean, I don't even know what they were like. Honestly, thinking on the other side of it, like they were trying to get real work done, like people who were like pastors.
Yeah, and you're just kind of like milling around in there. Like, right.
Yes. Right. And I'm like, I'm sure you have real stuff to do today, but
totally.
And I just like hang out here and eat all this extra food in the kitchen.
Yeah, I'm just kind of milling around. Like maybe I'll read this in the corner, or I'm waiting for Ben as he finishes this thing up. So I'm just going to kind of hang out here. Yeah, totally.
That's right. And so we started at that point. I think they had hired a new youth pastor Mike and Amber Lehman. And so then Ben started interning for Mike, and he was a youth intern for a while. And so then by proxy, I was hanging out a lot with youth. And so, yeah, we just kind of plugged right in and then went to school. We both went to college. We went to college in town and ended up getting married. And then we kind of stepped right into Mike and Amber's footsteps. I mean, Amber had helped Bert move the national office from Anaheim here.
Yep.
And was there part of that transition. And she did some of their events and stuff for a little while. And then Mike was the youth pastor at Sugar Land Vineyard. And it was kind of, they went to go plant Trinity Vineyard up in the north side of town. And when they did that, it kind of left two holes for Bert. And so we just kind of stepped right into their footsteps. Like we just stepped right into their shoes. And Ben became the youth pastor at Sugar Land Vineyard. And I came to work for Bert. So running events. Yeah.
So it's like, if you just hang around long enough.
You just hang out. I'm just here. I mean,
I'm on the bench. I'm ready. Put me in, coach. Yeah.
That's right. And I had oddly enough, even when I was in, middle school, I'd always found myself in some sort of planning scenario or job or whatever. One of the churches that we had gone to has big production thing that they would do, and they would always put these plays on, or whatever. Usually, around Christmas, the different plays and presentations and things that would happen. And so I would find myself organizing all of the volunteers and putting them all in their roles and making sure we had their costumes. And then I kind of worked in this lighting and sound and was calling lighting and sound cues and camera cues, or, it was these.
Well, how old are you when
logistics.
You're doing that? That's
I was 13 and 14.
Oh my God.
When I was doing that.
That's ridiculous. That's amazing.
I don't know. I was around and I could see how the functions, the pieces work together. Yeah. And they had this script, and I would just start marking cues on the script. And they would say, "Oh, seems like this is something you should do.
Yeah,
you should just
what you're
let
doing."
us know."
Yeah.
And so they gave me a radio, and I was calling cues.
It's so just great.
And then, in high school, there was a wonderful lady, Carolyn Monk is one of my early mentors, who had a company. It was a children's event company. I mean, they did balloon animals and face painting, and it was a children's entertainment company that she had. And I went to work with her, and she was so kind to me, just taught me all sorts of things about business, but also just about how to live your life in the world, right? It was in that little bridge of becoming an adult.
Yeah.
And sometimes those kinds of things that you need to hear are really difficult to hear from your parents. And she kind of filled in some of that space for me. And so I had this idea one time. I was what if we were to create event, party packages for kids? A mom could call and say, "Can you just plan my event from start to finish, from 8-year-old's birthday party?" And I'd be "Sure, let's do this." And we would put games and entertainment and costumes and all sorts of stuff together. And so we started marketing and selling these party packages that you could pick for your kids' parties. And we would, and then she loaned me out to a friend. She had a friend who was running a nonprofit for women who were in the gap. It was called Basics for Babies. They were in the gap period between getting their government benefits for WIC or any of the other government assistance programs when you are expecting a baby. And so her friend was I just need someone to help with some of these fundraising components. We need to partner with some local businesses. And she was well, I've got, Christian over here that maybe she would like to come and work for you for a little bit. And so she asked me if I would be willing to go and help them with some of their early fundraising stuff. And I said, sure, we'll check it out. And so for about, I don't know, I think it was 6 months, maybe less, about 4 months or so, I set up a program for them to start doing like virtual baby showers. I would send them like a whole thing so their companies could go and start, doing baby showers for babies that then ultimately they would like donate it back to us. Right.
And so how old are you when you're doing that?
Still... I think I was like 18, 17.
Wow. That's incredible.
I had just started college. And so I was trying to help this little
It's amazing.
nonprofit get started. And and then I worked from there to running events that hit me into like a nonprofit world, into development and events, running events. That was kind of the track. Then I started down and I jumped from there. So by the time I connected with Vineyard, I was already running events for a minute and doing some development work with our local nonprofits. So, yeah.
So when you hear that, like you're a mom now, and you imagine 13, 14-year-old kid calling out cues, 18-year-old kid building virtual events. Does that strike you as like wild? I mean, like, because when you're in your own life, it's just like, I don't know, this is my life. But something does happen as you're a parent where you start to see your kids in the same ages you've been in. And there's parts of what they're doing you find extraordinary. And then there's parts of what you realize about yourself that's kind of extraordinary. Like, it's kind of weird that I was doing these kinds of things at this age.
Yeah, definitely. Looking back, it was like, well, first, nobody should have ever probably put me in.
Yeah, my first learning is, like, what am I doing in this job? Right.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
There were some like steep learning curves. I had a lot of gracious people that were committed to helping me and seeing me succeed. And I had all the confidence in the world. You could have you're like, by the time I think I was like 21, maybe, when I was running events for our the largest AIDS foundation, our largest AIDS organization in Houston is called AIDS Foundation. And they're like, yeah, you think you could put on this AIDS walk? We have like 10,000 people coming and it's only responsible for raising like half of our fiscal, budget. And I was like, sure.
I got it. I got
that.
Yeah.
Have I ever done an event that large before in my life? No. It was just, I just learned a lot.
It's incredible. So great.
But, yeah. So
what do you think, like right now, as you're hearing you're around 18-year-old kids, what does that tell you about you?
I think, it's what it tells me is that the Lord had a plan for me.
Yeah.
Not once have I ever not felt called even to the job that I'm doing. Like, I feel very much like I have, like, the Lord has called me to work for the Vineyard. I feel very much like that is why I have been here as long as I've been here. I felt like the Lord set me up, really, and gave me a ton of like trial by fire experiences to be able to run events with pastors and leaders who are all used to running their own events.
Yeah.
It's a ton of flexibility. It's a ton of coordination with people who have all sorts of different ideas, and bring all of that together. I think with minimal resources, trying to maximize what you've got. So I think those are all skills that I've built really early on, trying to maximize what we've got and we have in honorable ways. So,
because then when you take the shift where Ben comes youth pastor, and then how old are you then? Because you're married by then, right?
Yep. Yeah. We're probably we're in our really early 20s.
Yeah, I was going to say.
We got married really young. I was 22 when I got married. And Ben's a couple years younger than I am. So I think Ben was a youth pastor for like 8 years. if I remember correctly. Someone's going to like send me a note and be like, wrong. You know, don't fact check me, but I think that's about right.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah. And
so before you're 25, I mean, it's like, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which again, is pretty young for a job with that level of responsibility. And that's quite a bit. And then he's a youth pastor at that age for 8 years, like you're describing. It's like, wow, that's a lot. And then in many ways, that same work you started doing then, you're doing now. You've just done all the way through. Now, of course, there's different iterations as things have changed, but you know, you're doing events, administration, project managing, this or that for so it's how many years now? Have you? I
started here in 2004. So I think, what is that, 18?
Yeah, 18 years.
18 years.
20-year anniversary coming up.
That's right. Right around the corner. Right around the corner.
That is amazing. Yeah. And if you could right now, with everything you've experienced in the vineyard and doing the jobs, because you're working for Bert, you know, and sort of the whole system of the vineyard, then you're working for Phil and all different things. And now you're working with me and our whole team. What would you, if you could, like, you have your 5 minutes, you get to just sit with Christian at 24, 25, she's taking this job. And you can just say, here's something I want to tell you about this work, or even about you as you're about to do this work. What would you want to tell you?
I think I would go back and tell myself that I should allow myself the same amount of grace that the Lord gives me. I think everything gets so tied up in needing to be perfectly done, and experience needs to be completely without any flaw. And so I think I lived a lot of my early years just kind of wound up in a lot of just anxiety for getting it right and wanting to make sure that it was done with excellence and perfection. And I think I would tell myself to relax a little bit. And I would also tell myself that what I'm doing is a ministry. It is important, and God sees what I'm doing. That I'm not just making a way for that so that somebody else can do ministry.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I fully grasped that early on. I think looking at it now, I see it much more like it is, like, this is the ministry that God has called me to. And people who work behind the scenes, and people who, you know, put the pieces together so that someone can show up and have an encounter with Jesus, that is a ministry.
Yep.
And it's not less than the person who stands up on the stage and does the ministry call. It is a catalyst for Jesus to be able to, the Spirit to show up and for people to not be distracted and be able to fully be present. And so I think that those are probably the two things.
Those are good. Those are really good.
Not to take myself so seriously.
Not to take yourself so, well, and it's a hard thing when we do ministry, especially when we start as young as you're describing, because part of what it means to be in your early 20s is earnest and passionate, right? So, you know, so you're supposed to care. Like, it's supposed to be important. You know, it's supposed to be meaningful, and it's life or death. And and then if you, and by the way, that's true if you're working a sales job, you feel that way. That's true if you are an engineer, you feel that way. But then when you mix in sort of the spiritual nature of the work, so this is the kingdom of God, like the tending to people's souls, you know, all that stuff gets kind of woven in, because it's important. It's a big deal. And you match that with, you still don't even quite totally understand who you are yet. So there's any number of identity gaps for people in their 20s. So, and you're newly married, so you have whatever that pressure is, or you have small kids, so you have that pressure.
Yeah.
It's a really, because I mean, again, my story, I mean, we plant right when I turned 25. So it's like a month after I turned 25, we move here, knowing hardly anyone, group of folks. And like the earnestness of it all, like this is a big deal. And by the way, it is a big deal. I mean, you're going to try and plant a church. That's a big deal. But, listening to you, it's such a difficult thing to know how to process, because in one sense, it is sort of the magic of being that age. There's everything's kind of magical in a certain like totally bizarre way that doesn't actually line up with reality. Yeah. But then also, that's really the beauty, the power of it. It's the joy and the pain and the growth of it all. So it's I've thought about this a lot, even in my own life, like, or I bumped into church planners, their early 20s, mid 20s, and there's a part of me that's like, go for it. Like if you're a little, totally. I'm not sure I want to throttle you down. You should go for it. This is a stage of your life you can, and swing hard, go for it, whatever. But then there's another part of me, it's like, but don't hurt yourself. Like, have some mentors around. Have a few older folks in your life that can remind you to take a vacation, that can make fun of you from time to time and encourage you, tell you that you're doing a good job and that you're not going to get it all done in 1 year. You're not going to get it all done in 5 years. You have a long road. The road is way longer than you realize. All that little stuff is helpful if it doesn't throttle people down. You want them to have energy and faith about their life, especially in those windows of time. So it's an interesting tension, isn't it, to think about, or at least it is for me. Like, you're probably way wiser even. I mean, you're running companies and you're 18 or whatever.
I highly doubt it.
But, well, I don't actually. I know myself. I know my own story. So I really don't doubt that. But yeah, it's the interesting tension. But what you also have, Christian, which is really amazing, where I'd kind of like to pivot a little, is like, I bet you, it would be interesting for you to explore this. Like, if you looked around at how many folks do you know that have worked in a similar job in an organization from early 20s on for what amounts to 20 years? And technically you were working before that. I mean, if we're going to be honest, like, when you're milling around in the church, I mean, we don't count those as like actual billable hours, I suppose, but you were working for the church then. So it's really your entire adult life in a nutshell. I mean, you have some other little things that were there that helped train you. That's so rare to meet people who have done that for that amount of time. And that has to be calling. What's encouraging to hear you say it's calling, because when I do meet people that's true of, what they usually just say something like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, no, I mean, my dad worked at the Ford plant. I got a job at the Ford plant. It's good benefits. It's where I live. It's where my family is. It's great.
Yeah, this will do.
Yeah, they're not mad about it. They're not, but they're also not like, yeah, this is calling. This is like my life. They're like, yeah, I don't know. It's fine. That's most people, I think, that have longevity. It's really rare to see people do it and say, no, I think it's calling. I think it was calling in my life that kept me in this exact same thing. I mean, even for pastors, that's really, really rare. You'd think to get into the work, they have to think they're called in a very particular way. But I like the thing you qualified, which is, no, I think to do this kind of work, you should probably feel like you're called.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the thing I would want to say to me that I didn't get. That's because it is ministry. I think that's really wise.
Yeah. I think what some people don't think about when they're going into ministry or starting to get into any sort of ministry work.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think about like all the things you're going to do, right? The series you're going to preach, or the thing you're going to do that'll call the people to come,
mm-hmm.
or the action of the things.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you think about like your own spiritual life, right? Like how you're going to work your week out and how your plan's going to happen.
You should, whether they do or
right.
not. But right.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've learned the most about is kind of the inner workings of how sometimes ministry can work. And once you see kind of behind the curtain a little bit about how things happen when you work with human beings, I think that at the end of the day, it can only be calling sometimes.
So say more about that. Why? Why does the inner working make it so it better be calling or you're toast?
Yeah, I think it's because the Lord has to give you grace to work with people to get a thing done in this way.
Dude, I know. I'm laughing because it's just accurate. It's like, yes, that is exactly right. Yes, I agree.
The unfortunate reality is, in my experience, not everyone I work with has been the most gracious and most kind and most generous, forgiving, yada, yada, yada. Right? And because at the end of the day, they have their own things that are going on in their life, right? Yeah. Someone screamed at them for something that they did. It's like the domino tips over. And there's only so much pressure you can take from a leadership standpoint of a church, from a church leadership standpoint. I'm talking like number one, number two, but first, second chair.
Yep.
And oftentimes when you're in a position like mine, you sometimes don't get the best version of that leader.
Yes.
Which is unfortunate, but it's also real. And I feel that for me personally, now I'm not going to talk about everybody who's on, I'm sure every other church staff works perfectly functionally fine.
Yeah, of course.
And
everyone I've ever seen.
I am not speaking from any, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea about anyone I've ever worked with. I'm not trying to place blame of anything. Sure. However, some people have been really hurtful and unkind.
Yeah.
In a support position. And I don't know that lots of people who are in a behind the scenes, either administration or logistics project, I don't think they always get the best versions of their leaders.
They don't.
And so it's only calling, I think, that would let me be in this position this long. Right? It's God's grace. It's like, I know that whatever's happening, someone maybe just like totally was terrible to you, which is what's affecting the way that you're treating me right now.
Yeah.
And while it's not okay, I'm not excusing it, it does give me a grace, so to say. I can only imagine the types of pressure that you're leading from, like the amount of pressure that you have in your seat.
Yes.
And I can tell you right now, my own humanness, that is not a natural thing for me to be able to have that kind of grace for another person.
Yes.
That's not my natural humanness, right? So I think that's where God's grace comes in for me, and why it becomes like a ministry, and why it is a ministry, and why it is a calling to be able to be in these kinds of positions. Because once you see kind of how the inner workings of a system, you have some decisions to make.
month, we introduce a new book or recommended resource to dig in deeper. For the last quarter of 2022, we are focusing on gospel proclamation. And this month, we're recommending that you read, share, and utilize the Alpha booklet, Why Jesus? This resource is available on Alpha's website in 7 languages, and you can find a link to it in our show notes.
I want to ask you about 10 more things about that. But what I'm listening to you, I'm aware of like a whole bunch of things at once, which is what I want to ask you in a second. But what I'm aware of is how rarely those who want to do ministry realize how much administration is actually running everything. Mm. About every intern we've ever trained or pastors we've trained and planted, somewhere, usually a few months in, they say something like, I can't believe how much administration is required to do anything. Like the shocking amount of email, phone, logistic to, okay, so I have to like have these 3 meetings in order to have the information I need, let alone have the meeting, on how to organize the thing, to know how to get the people to prepare for the meeting. You know, like, so
yeah,
there's like 9 components that have to line up in order on a timeline in order for us to even get the right people in the room doing the right things, and how those things break 100% of the time. So like if there's enough things, the statistical odds that a few things are not going to work are roughly 100%. And by and large, the vast majority of people that have chosen to do this kind of work didn't think they were agreeing to that. So there's something about their own mindset that has to shift, you know, that there's a lot of this kind of work to do. Like you're a pastor. I mean, I'm always nervous when I meet a pastor and like, you know, I'm just more of a vision kind of person. You know, I just come in and say stuff and I'm like, uh-oh, that's a bad sign. Because like, that's not how the world works.
Right.
It's just not how the world works. Like, I don't care. And I, of anyone, by way of temperament, gifting, I mean, I'm a freaking philosophy graduate. I mean, give me a break. Like, who's more of an ideator than a stinking philosophy graduate? Anyway, so I mean, I get it. Like, I can crawl inside the skin of that because I live in that skin. But, I mean, man, the amount of just work to get work done, working, I mean, to use some kind of systems language, working on it, not in it, being above the scenarios. I find almost anyone that's training in ministry is shocked at the amount of work to do. They're just shocked. They're like, I can't believe every intern I've ever had. Eventually they're like, dude, like, how many times do we have to talk about how to have the meeting to have the meeting? Is this real? And I'm like, yeah, this is like a lot of what we do right here. You don't just like walk around dispensing cool thoughts. Like, you know, there has to be a room. And then the more successful you are, i.e. the more that God gives favor to where things grow and more people are impacted, that type of work only goes up. An exponent gets put onto it. So the other myth people have is, hey, we have a smaller church. You know, if we could just grow to be 200 people, if we could be 400 people, man, we'd be able to hire people and the things would work and the No. It only goes up. Now it's true, you can diffuse some of this work, but you're never out of it. This is just like the work. This is what it is. And as you were talking earlier, that language in the Bible of gifts of administration are the same little Greek words used for a helmsman or a helmswoman, like on a boat, like a ship. Someone that's directing. So far from admin and ops and event planning being this sort of like thing that's happening in some weird room in the inner sanctum of this machine. No, I mean, the language that's used in the scriptures gives the impression of directing and steering and alignment, calling out to different folks on the ship. So, you know, as I'm listening to you, I think some of the frustration that folks like you experience is pastors didn't realize what they were agreeing to. So they find themselves frustrated all the time that they're in certain kinds of conversations because they've just not come to grips with the fact that this is actually the work. This isn't on the side of the work. This is the work. And the culture you create while doing the work. Like, you know, I mean, the amount of church planners I talk to are like, oh man, you know, we're doing all the setup and, you know, get the boxes we roll in from the truck and we're doing the stage and the it's the worst. You know, it's like an hour before and it's an hour after. And it is work. So I don't want to minimize that. But about everyone I know that has kind of moved through that stage and then maybe they do have a building, I'm trying to think if there's an exception. I don't think I've heard an exception. They all talk about back when they did that and how it was kind of like they were all connected. We were all kind of in this thing together. And now we've gotten a little more sophisticated and we're not quite as connected. And what that's betraying is the fact that the culture of connection was easier to facilitate when we all just kind of were doing it. We were all in the work. We were sort of despising that. But now you can look back and go, no, that afforded us an opportunity to feel like we all had our shoulder to the plow. And so even as churches grow, to your point, you know, pastors have to keep asking, how am I behaving with people that are running these kinds of processes in the life of our church or even in the vineyard as a whole? Like, what kind of a person am I? Listen, we're not asking for everyone to float above the earth, okay? But just like do I find myself, you know, behaving in a way that just sort of pushes people around or dumps my emotions when I don't feel like I get what I want? And I guess that's what I'd want to ask you is, good and bad, what do you know about pastors from your work that probably the normal person wouldn't know? Like, you have an interesting lens into what have been hundreds, if not thousands of pastors by now. And you interact with them and what they're trying to get done with their church or how they're trying to lead in some component of what extra local ministry might be, or this or that event that you're helping them do for the regional or the national or the thing with the thing. What would you know? What do you feel like would maybe even help people who don't have the vantage point you have? What do you think you've seen that most people don't quite realize?
I think that you can tell. Hold on, let me go back. Let me think about this for a minute.
Well, you said one thing earlier, which is how much pressure and pain some of these people live with. You know, that they're being kicked and beat up in some of their own contexts to where that leaks out when they feel like they have some kind of power or a place to vent.
Right.
It kind of comes out in some sideways ways.
Yeah. I think that in those ways you can start to obviously see some of those negative things, right? When someone shows up to an event that they don't have any skin in the game as to how the event is run. Take, for example, like a national conference.
Yeah.
And their tickets aren't exactly the right whatever. They thought they were registered, but they weren't registered or whatever.
There's a logistic gap of some kind.
There's a logistics, somewhere along the line, someone has made a mistake or something. And I can only imagine the level of stress that maybe somebody is under in their local context.
Right.
To then like get on an airplane and fly across the world and not know whether or not they've got a ticket to an event, to show up to find out they don't. And in that like boiling moment, and probably you got into a fight with your spouse on the way.
Right.
Probably you got lost.
Right. Yeah. Who knows?
Who knows? You show up and you're like, my ticket's not here. And you're like, well, it's just icing on the cake. Right.
Right. Yep.
And in that moment, you boil over because it's just gotten to be too much.
Yeah.
In terms of like when you're actually planning an event, what I can tell the difference between some leaders over others is there is only a certain amount. You know, if you think about like filling up a jar with all the things until it's full, right? You put in the rocks and you put in the sand, and everyone's heard that example, right? Of filling it, that sort of stuff. Well, if you're already up at the top of that jar and you add like a logistic moment, and that's not your preferred way of interacting, right? You would rather do anything else than talk about name tags at this moment.
Right.
You know, it can be annoying and it can be frustrating.
Yeah.
And so I think the difference is the level of like being able to have like a non-anxious presence of being like, you know what, empowering somebody else to make that call.
Yes.
Empowering somebody else to not have to ask you about those types of things if you don't want to be in that level.
Yep. And
I think what's helpful, even from my side of the seat, when you're thinking about like surrounding yourself with a team, is even sharing with them like your preferred way of operating, right? So like from my side of it, I can say, I know that this person doesn't want to be in the details. Like I know them well enough. We've worked together for a minute. You don't want to be in the details.
Why are you why are you talking about me, Christian? I'm just kidding.
You just learn about your team.
You do. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And you know the level of things that they want and the types of information they want. You know when to call them in and when not to call them in.
Yes.
And I think when you start in that little building, or you do church in a box and you're loading and unloading every single week, you are actually forming that relationship of understanding between each other. So when the church does grow, you've already got those are already all broken up. Like you already know how everybody's going to do everything, right? You kind of can immediately say, okay, you've got this, go team, and you've got to trust.
Right.
That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And I think it would actually serve all church staff teams to do something like emotionally focused.
Yeah. Yep.
Because I think understanding and having an awareness where you already operate from, like I'm a details person. When someone on our team comes and says, hey, I think, in next week, I want to do this webinar with 500 people, I immediately start unlocking all of the things.
Yeah, you can see all the processes, right, in your mind. Yeah. Exactly.
But the person who's coming to me doesn't necessarily want to know all those details.
Yes.
They probably don't care because they're focusing on something different. And it's helpful if both of us have an awareness of how we're showing up.
Yes.
It's helpful if I have an awareness of the things that drive me and the things that are hard for me.
Yes.
And I have an acknowledged awareness of the things that are driving them and are hard for them.
Yes.
It just builds a sense of trust with one another.
Yes.
It's difficult when you're doing events across a movement.
Like a country. Yeah. Right.
Like a country.
Yeah.
Because you don't have that same level of trust.
Right.
So there is, with each event you're doing, there's a rebuilding of sorts.
And
you are working with different teams.
Yep.
And part of what I would always recommend is always showing up saying, I don't really know everything about this.
Yes.
Like, you're always learning something, and I don't need to recreate a wheel. Like any team I work with, but where maybe we're hosting an event in a local church and I'm working with that team, I'm like, you guys have a preferred way of working. Your church knows and understands a certain system and a rhythm that you're already working in. How can I come alongside and us work together within the system that you've created, rather than expecting to fit, a square peg in a round hole of just because I have a way I've done it before doesn't mean it's the only way.
That's really good.
I don't know if that answers your question.
It really does. I think I'm amazed at how many pastors have not done or thought through training with team dynamics, how temperament, how people's own stories, their own emotional health and story and formation and development impacts the way that they interact on teams. And fundamentally how they think about or manage conflict. So you mentioned, our emotionally focused process. I think that's helped a bunch of folks. I love Lencioni's work. If anybody's not read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team or The Advantage, they have a few tools that go along with that, because again, pastors think I'm getting into this thing where I'm going to preach, I'm going to lead kind of cool experiences. I see myself in a ministry time. I see myself preaching. I see a worship service. I might even see a small group or a leader meeting. But I'm amazed at how many pastors have just had little to no training in team dynamics of like, okay, how are different tempered people going to get different kinds of projects done over time, from ideation all the way to implementation. Different people fit at different parts of that. Their gifts kind of rise up versus other people. I've always used it with volume. Certain stages, people's volume goes up. Other people's volume goes down. Other stage now, that gets inverted as we get closer to the ground. But those are all dynamics you have to learn, which ultimately lead to what you described, which is managing conflict. How do we get clear about expectations, what we do when there's a gap? Andy Stanley has an incredible training on trust versus suspicion. I think it's like essential for any team. I mean, heck, if you're like coaching little league soccer, I don't care what it is. Just how do you think about the different folks that are working together, how they form the expectations? What do we do with the gaps that are created? Because sometimes, or Scazzero's work, he does a bunch of stuff on this, emotionally healthy discipleship, emotionally healthy leadership. I'm amazed at how many pastors have done like no training at all in any of these arenas. So then when they hit a moment, it's like all this stuff starts happening. They're either shocked by people's responses. So they're sitting with someone who's suddenly despondent, kind of not talking or disappearing, or angry, or manipulative. Somebody's kind of working an angle in the midst of their church or in a small group. And they're like, why are people behaving like this? And they're surprised by it. And so they assign any number of motives to that. This makes this person a mean person. This makes this person a manipulative person. Oh, they're just kind of a depressive, or they're kind of apathetic or whatever. When often what you're not seeing is their character. You're seeing the result of the system. And often you're seeing the result of your leadership, frankly. That's the hardest part to acknowledge as a leader, is like, somehow I'm contributing to this and I'm setting the context here. I don't want it to be me, but I'm setting the context here. And somehow, I don't know how I'm doing that. And lots of leaders tend to attract people that are like them. Because they are most familiar with people that think and behave in the world the way they do. And so, a good little test of the health of any team is to do temperament tests, Enneagram tests. You can use even the Working Geniuses test that the Lencioni group does. You can do the DISC. You can do all of these. You can do none of these. You can do one of these. Do something if you've never done anything. And then just look at your team. And if you have holes, like we don't have anybody in this profile.
Yeah.
That means something. I don't know what it means. It might just mean you've not identified them. It might mean you tend to scare those people away. It might mean that they're there, but they're like tolerating you, not working with you. I mean, it could mean, I don't know. It would. There's too much to talk about there, but
yeah.
But what you're describing is most lead pastors, and again, this isn't always true, but most are higher in the ideation, conceptual thinking space.
Mm-hmm.
They're lower in the concretizing, kind of sensing space. They're more of the high intuitives, low sensing, which means they're probably driving any number of folks crazy all the time without knowing they're doing that.
Yeah.
And if they don't have any conflict resolution skills, it feels even scary to ask, like, hey, how do you think this is going? Or what's working and not working? And so I think you're drawing some real stuff to the surface. It's really important for pastors to think about, but it's also important for us to think about in the vineyard, because as we're trying to organize, bring people together, do different kinds of things, our little movement is pretty diverse in the way leaders think about the events they're running, the size of their church, what they value by way of worship or teaching or environment or experience is really broad. Therefore, at any moment we do a thing from a national perspective, we will 100% of the time have some people that don't think we did enough of something or too much of another thing. That's 100% of the time. It's not like, and that's true in your local church, but you can kind of set the palate of your local church a certain way where they kind of get used to what you do. That's not true nationally. We're just always going to be in that moment. And that's the benefit of being diverse too, is you get a lot of different expressions. We get to grow together. But and you are at the crux of those challenges. Like, because you're having to implement everything with teams. That's real.
Yeah.
That's real work.
Yes. And I think one of the unique spaces that we have being outside of our just a local church with a local culture, experiencing the diversity across the nation also helps us keep an eye on those things where maybe the volume is turned up a little bit in one area that we maybe need to pay attention to more.
Yes.
We start seeing people give us some feedback and their experiences and can take it and be like, oh man, I didn't see it that way because that's not how I am in my local context or how I would have perceived that or experienced that. And so I think it's also super helpful when people give that feedback.
Totally.
Like, man, it would be really great if we could experience something in this way.
Yes.
I remember early on, there was like an event that we were doing and somebody was like, what if we had this thing at the event? I don't really remember what it was, but I do, my gut was like, why would anyone want to do that?
Why would we do that? Right.
Like, why would we do that at all? And so I just was like, let me just take some time. Let me think about this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we can make it happen. Let me just, whatever. Ultimately went away and came back and was like, okay, I think that we can make this happen if we do it at this time in this space or whatever.
Yeah.
And the experience, like, it blew up. Like, it was something that really impacted people, that a large group were like, man, the Lord really met me through this thing. And I came away from that thinking, like, just because I don't experience the Lord because that's not a place where I connect with the Spirit, doesn't mean that that's not a place where someone else does. And had I not listened or taken the time to hear a different perspective about
you would have missed
that experience, I mean, we would have missed it.
Yeah.
And all those people that had a really powerful encounter with the Spirit would have, the Spirit, like, I'm not trying to say we control the way that the Spirit moves at all.
Yeah.
They would have figured it out. It's just, I think that those are the sweet moments that are really what make these kinds of details worth it.
Yes.
In the end, of like, if we're a catalyst for an encounter, and even going back to like our youth spaces, I feel like if there's a time and a place that somebody gets to experience an encounter of the Holy Spirit, I would like to do whatever I can to make that that opportunity exist.
Amen. Yep.
Right? Like, if thinking about like, had I not had an encounter with the Holy Spirit when I was a teenager,
yep,
or even a kid. I was like 9. I remember, I said a little prayer and had a moment where I felt like the Lord was really with me. And there are moments that I can pick that up, even in my childhood, all into my youth. And so I think, like, even as we're doing the national conference, we have families coming and kids are coming and youth are coming. I feel like all of those details are super important.
Yes.
To facilitate encounters with the Holy Spirit, which means you're working with a ton of different kinds of people and teams that, if you can just pay attention to how you're showing up and where your emotional space is, and the unmet or unset expectations that you're not aware that you had under the surface there, you can identify some of those things. It really will, I think, unlock some freedom in your relationships so you can build something where the Lord can move.
Yes. That's huge. Well, and you've been doing it forever. And we have our big national conference coming up next summer, which is a big deal. And it's a bit of a different vibe for us in that we'll all be together in a way that we've not been before. Like, we'll be able to stay, eat, worship, do everything in one place. And we'll have, so it'll be a little more conducive for families, hopefully, especially if you have younger kids, and that's going to be different. So there's going to be some folks that are like, this is the best. How have we not done this forever? And then there'll be other folks like, we've never done it like this, and this is not what I wanted. Right. And yet we'll still be all the things we are. We're still going to have worship and teaching and ministry, and we're still the Vineyard. But we felt really led by God to try something different. So even in that, even because, obviously that's part of what you and I have in front of us right now, there's going to be some things that may or may not work, something we're trying that's a little different, but we kind of felt like we thought God was leading us in this way based on some of the convictions we had around being more connected, more of a family across the country. So that's pretty exciting. But you, of everyone, are bearing the brunt of any number of those logistic dynamics. So, Well, what else do you want to say about that? What about the national conference? Because that is kind of a thing that is really squarely in the center of your thinking.
I think it's just the stuff that you had already said. I think doing it in a camp environment.
Yeah.
One thing I'm super excited about is the idea that you can bring your family, whatever age group they are.
Yep.
And because there are like things to do, and there's like a cafeteria, and there's a little coffee shop, like you're not constantly getting in your car to leave, even with like your little staff or with your your church staff. You're not necessarily having to go back to the hotel or figure out what restaurant. And you can do that if that's your choice.
Yep.
But you could stay on site, and then your kids could have a stronger opportunity to get to know one another because they're like playing in the field, or they're doing there's a pool on site that you're like spending your afternoon, and you're connecting with families, from across the states that are maybe in the same stage of life that you're in. And maybe you can encourage one another, or maybe your kids will develop a friendship that who knows where that would lead for them, and foster an opportunity for them. So I think in those ways, we're trying to create opportunities for interaction and relationship building, where it's not just my church brought this number of people and we're going to caravan there. We're going to caravan and leave. But it's the idea that we're fostering relationships amongst all of our churches so that when you're hanging out, you might run into different church teams and get to be more connected with one another. There's opportunities for that.
Amen.
And I don't know, who doesn't love Colorado in the summer? I think it's going to be beautiful.
I think so. I'm pretty biased, but I think it's going to be pretty great. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
I think, you could make a choice to run up the road and go to a restaurant that might have better food than the camp food you're going to be eating. Maybe. I think that what you could also get is showing up at like a cafeteria and going through the line and having an opportunity to get to know somebody.
Yep.
And sit with them, at whatever meal and experience, a relational moment that you wouldn't have had.
That's right. Being connected.
If you weren't shown up, you didn't show up. So,
Amen. May it be. Well, I'm super, super grateful for you, Christian, and you making some time. We could talk for a very long time about some things we talked about, and we will be, I assume, for years to come. But I'm genuinely grateful, and just hearing your story, hearing how God, exactly what you said, was setting you up so young to see you doing all the work that you're doing now. It is remarkable. It is, and I do know from having lots of conversations with you, your heart for pastors, your heart for this movement has been given to you by God. And I'm just really, really grateful. And I appreciate you taking some time to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. And I'm so excited about all the things that we've got coming down the line. I mean,
yes, me too.
I just am.
So many fun things. Well, and you're at the center of a lot of it, running all those events. So thank you. And we'll get another time. I think it'd be good to talk again.
All right. Let's do it.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.